awaits.
Something's coming through these bushes and you hear it. It's walking on two legs, and the entire other side of this waterway is erupting. And sometimes there's several of them at the same time. There's no doubt what it is.
I think we all deserve to know the truth.
Archaeologists have been digging hominoid bones out of the ground for over 150 years. We know hominoids existed. This is indisputable. If you're unsure about what you're staring at right now, by the end of this film, you won't be. That's a Bigfoot moving off. And he broke a few branches to let me know that he's not okay with me being there. Now, coming from your current perspective on the issue, I realize that last statement may sound ridiculous. But if you take a long, hard look at what we're going to show you in this film, I believe you will walk away with the full knowledge and understanding that the Sasquatch species, the Bigfoot species, is out there, and it's real. And not only that, but that it's really important, and it's not being taken seriously by the people who are supposed to explain your physical reality to you. Mainstream academics. Every year, tens of millions of dollars are funneled into biological studies around this country. And yet nothing is being done about this. Our film will show you that it's not as complicated as you may think it is. After all, if they're real, we should find evidence that they're real. And you're about to see a whole bunch of it, including what they look like, the faces of several different Sasquatch. You're staring at one right now. Now, this particular Sasquatch is watching us from 30 feet away. We heard it walk up. This is happening. And yet, the general public, you, for the most part, don't believe and understand to your core. You don't know that the Sasquatch species is real and that it's out there. Science has failed to do its job. And not only that, but you're being misinformed about the entire issue.
Bigfoot experts are presented in the media as experts on the subject of Bigfoot, but the reality is they may be anthropologists, they may be animal behaviorists, they may be zoologists, they may come from a number of scientific disciplines, none of which incorporates the study of Bigfoot, but they're presented to the public as experts, and so it continues to, I think, negatively influence public perception of this issue. The truth is, most of these are honest people. Most of them are outstanding scientists in their respective fields, but they simply haven't studied this issue, and they should not be represented as authoritative voices on the subject.
It's true. When science gets involved on these Bigfoot shows and these Bigfoot documentaries, invariably, they refuse to connect with what eyewitnesses are telling them, and any evidence that's provided is reviewed in a way that gives the viewer the idea that the evidence has been thoroughly evaluated and somehow debunked, when it hasn't been. If you watch carefully, you'll see they're not explaining it, they're explaining it away. And oftentimes, it's explained away to the degree that it's an insult to the intelligence of the eyewitness.
I think the most damaging statement that comes from mainstream science is that the Bigfoot simply cannot exist and therefore doesn't. And so a lot of people who don't do any further examination of the issue just accept that on face value and dismiss the topic from their mind.
You should understand that these people get paid to say what they say. They'll find a guy that has a contradictory opinion, and they'll pay him money to state his contradictory opinion on television.
I never contemplated the Bigfoot species before 3.5 years ago. Immediately upon entering the field, the signs were all around us, very obvious and very real, and quickly we started to gather and capture images that they exist.
What exactly have you evaluated objectively if you say that this isn't happening? There are 10,000 Americans running around telling you this is what's happening, and yet you get the disrespectful opinions. Why is that? Because they haven't conducted any field research to prove their hypothesis that Bigfoot isn't real. It's a fact that if you begin to conduct research in proper ways, you're going to prove that it's real.
The importance of a living relict hominoid to science is infinite. And yet most academics casually toss the subject, the very idea of a living relic hominoid, to the side, into the same pile as children's fairy tales. Why? Why would these people behave in such an unscientific way about something that their entire discipline is predicated on? The existence of hominoids, pre-humans, and with a possible missing link, a potential living relative of mankind. Why, against all common sense, would these people completely deny the possibility that Bigfoot exists? It's simple. They're afraid.
There's a stigma attached to this subject, and it's a death curse for an academic's career if they come forward and say that this is possible.
So what happens as an educator when you broach the subject of Bigfoot in an official way, in a professional way, on your job, within the context of your area of expertise? Well, you find out that it is the ultimate taboo subject, and you become the proverbial pariah.
If you're going to lose your job as an academic over stating what you believe to be the truth, something's not right.
The idea that's been induced in the public's mind that it's not possible for Bigfoot to exist is not only ridiculous, but it's contradictory to the most basic truths of human ancestry. Hominoids and pre-humans existed. We all know this. And these basic truths were introduced to us by the same people that now claim it's impossible for there to be a hominoid out there running around.
I've talked to these people and actually been in their offices with footage, and they are very resistant to identify what's on that film. I think that once they identify what's on the film as unidentifiable, that opens up a can of worms for them. And most of them refuse to be on camera. A lot of them that I've talked to over the past refuse to acknowledge any information whatsoever that would shed any light on the possibility that this is possible. The possibility that it's possible, right? They don't even want to go there.
It creates a false perception, a false construct out in the public mind, whether it's the rest of the scientific community, the general public, and the media. So the idea of validating the reality of Bigfoot never gets any traction.
I think it's unfortunate that me, as just an average person, would have to sit in an academic's office and literally say to them, you do realize hominoids are real. We've been digging them out of the ground for 150 years or more. Not only is it possible, but here's film that shows that this thing is real. And they don't even, their hands go up when I try to put the computer in front of them. They don't even want to look at it.
One of the most egregious reactions to the Bigfoot question is the statement that there's no physical evidence. And this is so bad because it just isn't true. Whether it's hair samples, scat, or footprints and tracks. The simple fact is there is physical evidence if you're interested in looking at it.
The claim that there's no physical evidence for the Bigfoot species being real is false. But invariably, these opinions come from people who haven't conducted enough field research to develop an educated response. While documentation of hair samples and gathering samples of hair in the field takes a lot of time and a lot of patience to investigate areas, it's there. But you have to actually look for it. So when you hear an academic say something like there's no physical evidence for the Bigfoot species being real, that's a red flag that they've never spent time in the field looking for physical evidence for the Bigfoot species. Because it's there. This is the hair sample we pulled from Central Florida that you just saw on that clip. It has some interesting physical properties. If you watch closely, as we reduce the amount of light showing on the sample, it begins to turn green. Yet if that individual stepped out into direct sunlight, you'd see him plain as day. This is yet another perfect example of how the Sasquatch blends in with its environment in varying degrees of light. Diffused sunlight, like most of the light under a forest canopy where they live, only makes them blend in more. Perfection in physical, evolutionary, environmental adaptation. Now you see me, now you don't. Perfectly natural. Here you can see how a modern human hair compares with our sample in a side-by-side viewing. The Sasquatch hair comes to life when an artificial outside light source is introduced on it from varying angles. Imagine millions of these all over your body in varying degrees of light diffusion under a forest canopy. The Sasquatch hair creates an illusion effect from its reflectivity and higher degree of color variation. Imagine 1 million of these hairs all over an 8.5 foot tall human primate who's hiding in the bushes under a forest canopy. And you'll have some understanding of what I've seen firsthand while in the bush researching. You question what you're staring at. But there's no getting around that it's staring back at you. Tracks of all shapes and all sizes were what we initially started to find. They all had one thing in common. They were walking a tightrope, and the stride was enormous. Some of the trackways that we found, the stride was 2.5 times as long as my own stride. I'm almost 6 feet tall, and some of these tracks were 3 times deeper than mine at 240 pounds in the same exact substrate. Our research data indicates that the Sasquatch are highly adaptive to whatever environments they choose to habituate. This makes them very difficult to study. It's become obvious through our research that some of their evolutionary environmental adaptations enable them to stay concealed even when they're observing humans at close proximity. They can be right there. You can hear them, you can smell them, you can even sense their presence. But it's extremely difficult to see one when they're in thick bush. One of the physical evolutionary adaptations of the Sasquatch is its achromatic coloration. Achromatic colors are comprised of neutral colors, like grays, and also black, and every hue of those colors in between. But how does this apply to the Sasquatch and how they exist? It creates achromatic distortion or achromatic aberration. The neutral coloration of the Sasquatch absorbs and then retransmits the coloration of the bush around it. Sunlight is broadcast onto the plants broadcast their colors onto the neutral coloration of the Sasquatch. Those colors are then retransmitted by the neutral coloration of the Sasquatch in the bush, giving the impression that the Sasquatch is the same color as the bush. This Sasquatch is not green, but it's only when the achromatic distortion or aberration is corrected that we can see it's actually gray. You see it as green because it's achromatically distorted. Simply put, the Sasquatch's neutral colorations and variations in hue will take on the coloration of the bush that it chooses to hide in, making it all but invisible to the naked eye. With millions of potential focal points, the chances that your eyes are going to pick him out are next to none. So if you've been searching for an explanation for why more Sasquatch aren't sighted in the forest, it's actually very simple. Their natural coloration provides perfect camouflage so that they can sit quietly and observe their environment, as any hunter does. They don't have technology. They don't have rifles to hunt with. They have to use their bare hands. And obviously, they're very successful.
A hominoid of unclassified origin. It's 100% real. If that's not important, I don't know what is.
Science talks about show me the evidence. And then when you show them the evidence and it's clear and concise, like this trackway that displays a gait that is not a normal human gait, they have nothing to say. And television programming on the subject is not helping.
There's only a certain amount of evidence that they're going to show you. They'll show you a track, and then they'll complement it with narration, and they'll say it's a purported Bigfoot track, or a proposed Bigfoot track, or a supposed Bigfoot track. And is that like an accurate way to describe it? Yes, because they don't know if it's real or not. The guy who's narrating the footage wasn't there. He's in a studio talking on, into a microphone. But for the people that acquire that track, who may have been in a situation where there were like gigantic things walking through the bushes and then they found a track, it's a completely different situation. So there's this disconnect between the viewer and the actual people who are acquiring the evidence. It's very difficult to overcome that, because until you experience something like this, it's difficult to buy into.
One of the things that you see most often in a lot of these Bigfoot or cryptozoology programs on television and other documentaries is this construct of having a pro and con expert commenting for the existence of and denying the existence of any given cryptid or creature. And this is really a false construct, I believe. Something is true or something is real or it isn't, regardless of the opinion of both sides. And that's what I would like to see more. Let's talk about the reality of the creature through observation of the evidence, and not just seeking to set up a construct where people can score debating points.
And that's why we do what we do. You're seeing things in this film that you've never seen before. They're not going to show you these things on television. They want to introduce a debate about something that there really is no debate about it. The Bigfoot species exists. I've seen it. Thousands of other people have seen it. The debate about whether it's real or not has absolutely no bearing on whether these guys are running around in clans all over North America. We got about 100 yards down the side of the trail, and my partner started to have some difficulty with the knapsack he had on. He started to make adjustments for it, and then I saw one of the straps was hanging, So I started to pull on it to tighten it around his waist, and that was when the gunshots started going off. And you could hear the swamp buggy coming, and it was like we had already left one area, and we went further in so that we could get away from them. And I was like frustrated because they had already arrived within 1,000 yards of our position where we were at now. And it was like, the guns are going off, and I kept thinking, this is unsafe. And so I was pulling on the side of his strap, on the side of his knapsack, and 2 or 3 different types of guns were being fired all of a sudden. It sounded like a pistol, a rifle, and a shotgun. And I glanced up at the trail, and when I looked up, there was a gigantic guy that was covered in hair, and he was literally coming across the trail in front of us, approximately 70 to 80 yards in front of us.
When I looked up from back there, he was this far off the ground.
I couldn't believe my eyes when I looked up. It was like, I stopped, and it took a second for my partner to stop, and then the individual was coming down like he had jumped from out in the swamp.
7.5 foot tall, 8 feet tall, extremely built. Man would look like a silver gray mop of hair on top of his head. None of it, there were no bangs or anything like that. It was all in his face, same length all the way around. Huge muscular shoulders. I mean, his shoulders were probably about that, up there like this.
And he was moving at an incredible rate of speed in the air. And for a second, it was like all these things were going through my head. First, I didn't think it was real. And then it was like the way he landed, I expected him to wipe out because he was going so fast.
I mean, he jumped across this trail, but it wasn't just that he jumped from obviously outside of here. To me, it looked like he cleared these bushes because he was coming down.
And it just didn't seem possible what I was seeing, but he literally landed on his tippy toes, very gingerly, even though it seemed like he was just going way too fast to do that. And it was like he did it 1,000 times.
His hair was wisping through the breeze. His hair was probably that long, 10 inches long.
Well, all of this is happening, and I'm looking at what's going on, and I'm thinking that it was like, I just couldn't even believe it. I didn't think it was real. And then when he landed, it was like I don't know if I made a noise or if I yelled or what happened, but he turned his whole body. And when he turned his whole body, and it was like, there was a saw palmetto sticking out of the side of the trail, he just kind of pulled the palm frond down.
When he leaned out, the hair went sideways, and he was staring right at me. He had very rectangular, dark eye sockets. He was an albino. His skin was grayish blue. And the weirdness, the weird, there was a few other colors, it was just strange.
And it was like he noticed us, and I could see his feet even shifted as he did this. And then the lower half of his body, I could still see below the palm fronds because they were sticking up, about from 6 to 8 feet, somewhere in there. And when he pulled it down, he leaned out, and when he leaned out, the hair on his face parted. And he kind of leaned and parted, and he looked at me. And then as he was looking at me, his face went to a scowl. He just kind of did like that.
Pinkish, strange color skin. And very, very, very dark. Looked like he had wraparound sunglasses on. Super dark, dark, dark. Huge. Huge chest. Hair was thicker on his shoulders. Hair was thicker on his forearms, hung past his hands. Couldn't see his fingers because the hair was so long. Thinner on his biceps. Everywhere that there was a muscle group that protrudes on his entire body, the hair was thinner. The hair wasn't real thick to begin with, except for on his shoulder. Looked like he had shoulder pads on. Really strange, man. Really strange.
I looked back at my partner and yelled, "Turn the camera on!" And it was just a split second, and the bushes were moving, and he was gone.
A little over 17 months after that day, we returned to the area and found this track. A couple hundred yards from where I had the encounter. I spent a lot of time out here when I was growing up, fishing and hiking, and I never thought I was going to see what I saw that day out here, and I was hell-bent on catching it on film.
The vast swamps and wilderness areas of the state of Florida are home to a legend. Join Team Crypto Reality as they go after the truth.
Go! The goal of the Bigfoot Researcher's Journal is real simple. To document what it was that I saw in 2013.
For the first time,
Melanie and I entered the field,
you're going to see what it
and what
takes
happened
to be a real.
was nothing short of incredible. Both of our lives were changed forever.
Behind the scenes.
My awareness of the Sasquatch species has definitely changed my perspective. It's really affected the way that I look at the world, and I think the way that I see myself in the world and choose my actions within this world.
Melanie is hardcore in the field, and she's responsible for many of the images of the Bigfoot you see in this film. Researching in the field takes us into some thick wilderness areas. Here you can see one of our team members pointing to a specific area. It turns out there was a Sasquatch there. We caught him on film. You're going to take a look at a juvenile Sasquatch, a young male Sasquatch. This is what they look like. It's a pretty good shot too. As we advance frames, he gets even clearer. You can see he's got dark bronze colored skin and an apex skull. He's sitting there watching us. They are incredibly difficult to detect, even when they're right there with you.
When you're in the field researching, your internal senses really start to take over when you feel the movement and the presence of this big species, and it's so overwhelming that literally your fight or flight mechanism starts to take over, and often it leaves you feeling things that you don't quite understand. But often when those experiences are happening, we look back and review the film, and that's when we've gotten some of our very best images on film.
I have been hit by large branches that have been hurled from the saw palmettos. After the sun has gone down, I have been growled at by something that walks on two legs and will throw things.
I've been growled at by Sasquatch. The experience was so overwhelming that I actually froze in paralysis. Mark had to push me to get me moving so he and I could get away to safety.
I have been followed. I've been hit with pine cones. I've had giant rocks thrown from the bushes into the water, and they've hit within 10 feet of us.
Responding to what's happening in the field is how we capture them on film. Hearing them walk, smelling them, experiencing the movement of the bushes.
Right. There's somebody behind us for sure.
I'm hearing them everywhere.
They're behind us and shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Was that behind us or in front of us?
that's behind us on our left. Here you can see the actual Sasquatch that snuck up behind Melanie and I. We heard it, and there it is.
At times they are so big and that they really, when they bound through the field, is when it becomes a overwhelming experience because their presence is so big.
I have seen in the last 2 years in this exact area that you're seeing these Bigfoot on our films, I have seen these same individuals, eyeball to eyeball. And all of this is real and all of it's happening. And it's something that the American people need to face. This is a reality in the wilderness. These things exist. And the longer that we deny that this is going on, the longer that people who had no desire to see one of these things have to go through what they're going through. And believe me when I tell you, you're in for a rude awakening if you happen to see one, because it will literally shatter your reality and your view of the natural world. It forces you to question every aspect of your existence when you're eyeball to eyeball with something like a Bigfoot. One of the things that I think is a primary contributing factor to why we don't see a lot of them is their relationship to the ground. I think it's real important if you're a researcher to absorb this to your core. They crawl around on all fours. They're on the ground a lot. They're in that mode where, because they have to hunt, they have to keep a low profile. That doesn't mean they won't stand up. That doesn't mean they won't watch from a standing position or anything like that. But we've caught them in low positions on so many occasions, and only a few times standing. I think they spend most of their time, based on what we see in our films and what we've experienced here in the field, on all fours or sitting on their ass in thick bush. Just because you don't see one does not mean that they're not right there, because they can be right there. I got hominoid smell so thick right now in the air that it really does seem like there's one somewhere right here nearby, because the ambient, when they've been in an area and they've left, is not this strong. This is more like there's a big hairy body somewhere right here. I got something in the area right here, I can tell you right now. It smells like it's down here on this bank, and I can tell you right now, I'm not going down there. I'm just not doing it, you know? It's interesting how they This particular individual is an absolute beast of a Sasquatch. Based on the topography of this area, and we're very familiar with it, this individual is approximately 9 feet tall, weighing close to 1,000 pounds. And in spite of his incredibly large, bulky stature, he's almost invisible to the naked eye due to the diffusion of the sunlight off the trees and surrounding bush. When we introduce an outside light source onto the film, you can plainly see this individual. In addition to the highlight, I'll also add and adjust contrast. And we'll zoom in for a closer look. As we get closer, you can plainly see there is a massive Sasquatch standing there. You can see the outline of his bulky shoulders and his entire face. Yet, on the film, it's very difficult to tell he's there due to his achromatic coloration and the diffusion of the sunlight through the trees and the surrounding plants. You're getting a look at what eyewitnesses have described thousands of times. And while the prospects of something like this being validated by mainstream science as real are both fascinating and terrifying at the same time, and knowing that these things are out there adds an entirely new dimension to your understanding of the natural world. Shouldn't you know?
Shouldn't someone be doing something about this from an authoritative standpoint? By letting you know this is what's out there?
So when we talk about red herrings, what's the red herring?
The red herring, this idea that acknowledging this creature would damage the economy because it would cut into American recreational use is ridiculous. It would probably enhance it. You probably have more people out in the wilderness than you really want. But, we all know Americans are going to go do these things. We're going to go hunting. We're going to go camping. We're going to go RVing. We're going to do that. If you came out tomorrow and said this creature is real and it's out there and we don't know what's going to happen, Americans are still going to go out there and do it. So that's just not true. They prop that up because on a very surface level, it sounds kind of sort of semi-logical, and it's great cover for people who don't want to go any further into this issue.
Technology like the modern day drone has enabled us to get into their environment from above, sometimes yielding incredible results. Here you can see a very large male Sasquatch staring up from the thick bush at our drone. They're there, and they're watching.
Validation of this species would bring about a number of changes. Number one, bringing this creature under the protection of the Endangered Species Act, incredible amounts of money for funding research, and all of these things would happen by simply acknowledging the reality of this creature. So, question, why is it not happening? Why isn't this creature acknowledged officially by mainstream science, by the government? Well, because there's something about it. The reality of it, there's something about how it's going to impact our general worldview that in their minds supersedes the desire for funding research. And it must be incredible if it supersedes the fiduciary factor here.
I think in all likelihood, based on what I've seen and the evidence that we've collected, we're dealing with something that is further along in the family Homininae than, say, gorillas and chimps. These guys belong somewhere in the hominoid pre-human lineage of the family Hominae. And when you really examine this, over the decades, there have been dozens of potential Sasquatch DNA samples submitted to academics and laboratories around the world. And if these people examine the mitochondrial DNA and it comes back modern human, they just toss the sample as contaminated. Well, we're dealing with a potential for a new member of the family Homininae. Wouldn't you want to examine the sample a little more thoroughly? Like, how about, what does the nuclear DNA tell us? I think what we're dealing with here is a human rights issue. It's a humanitarian issue. Ultimately, if the Sasquatch's DNA is examined and it comes back that there's some type of a human rights apply. And that opens a huge can of worms. While the government refuses to chime in on the Bigfoot issue officially and publicly, from time to time, researchers in the field come across blatant evidence that lets all of us know that these official government organizations and the people that run our wilderness areas around the country are fully aware the Bigfoot species is real. Keep in mind, that's the official U.S. Forestry Service logo. All of our attempts to contact the U.S. Forestry Service about the validity of this obvious and clear warning went unanswered.
So how has the internet impacted the Bigfoot research and potential validation? Well, I think the internet has affected this topic just like almost every other part of our society. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. We have the ability to move information around quickly. text, images, video. Researchers can share data. Researchers can post data and make it available for public consumption. 25, 30 years ago, people had to rely on an occasional blurb in some magazine or publication, hoping that they might catch something on television. Today, we have a lot more fluidity in how we can deal with this information. On the other hand, it makes kind of a bigger trash heap. There's more junk that can be quickly disseminated on the internet for the purposes of disinformation or just through incompetence.
Presenting information on the internet is a double-edged sword, absolutely, where we can reach large numbers of the public in one day. That comes with a price, and the price normally is the veracity of the evidence that you share. Anybody can have an opinion and state it on the internet, so controlling the information is a primary aspect of what we do. When we're in the field and we're experiencing interactions with this species and recording them and then putting it on the internet, and there are people who have absolutely no idea what's going on out there, and that is essentially 8.5 billion people, they're offended. They're offended at the very notion that this is possible. There's an army of people out there that no matter what the evidence is, they want to try to contradict what's going on. And I think that over time, that's become their position. They've lost all objective thought process. You can present data that clearly shows a Sasquatch, and they will find a way to not remain objective. And these are the types of individuals that are actually damaging the reality of the existence of Bigfoot. And ultimately, they're damaging validation of the species, because it's very difficult to begin to get unity within the community of individuals that actually does understand what's going on out there. And so I think the key in all of this is, as somebody who reviews evidence, is to remain objective. Ask questions. That's important. Developing opinions from television programming that essentially has produced squat in the last 15 years is limiting the general public's ability to understand what's really going on out there. The Bigfoot species, the Sasquatch species, whatever it is that locally, the terminology is used to describe whatever it is out there, it's real. It's that simple. And science is making it very difficult for the general public to understand that. Science has a hypothesis, and that's all. If science is interested, really, mainstream science, if they're interested in actually telling the truth, then they should say, well, we think it's not real, but we haven't conducted any research to prove that. Hypothesis is untested theory. It's an opinion. That's it. I can remember looking into the subject and, having a great deal of skepticism. And then, and as time went on, going into the field and actually taking the time to look into it and being willing to dedicate, a certain amount of time to actually physically researching in the field. And I can tell you that, having been on both sides of this entire issue, the reason most people are skeptical is that they haven't taken the time to truly look into this in the physical world. There is no doubt that when you get into these environments physically yourself, that if you're in an area that's occupied by Sasquatch, and they're all over this country, you will find evidence of the species. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why I don't buy that, mainstream biological sciences don't understand what's going on. I think that these people are fully cognizant that this is a real species, and that in these given areas, in every state here in this country, that there are individuals within the wildlife management departments and offices that have been tasked with managing the wildlife in these areas, and either through that, incidentally, managing the Bigfoot, or managing the Bigfoot directly. Within all of these parks, you will see evidence of the Bigfoot species as a keystone species in the data that all of these other studies encompass. When you study the environment that these things live in, they affect every single species. They affect the plants and all of the wilderness. They are absolutely a keystone species. And so the real proof that Sasquatch exists in the United States of America is contained within that biological data, in those studies, those whitetail studies, the studies on the invasive species of hog, the studies on the crocodilians, the American alligator here in the South, the birds, the ecology itself, and the data that our mainstream scientists have clearly shows that there is another species that is here and affecting all of it. And so the validation of the Bigfoot species, and I believe a key aspect of this, is in confronting mainstream science to begin to take either another look at their data or a look at themselves and the fact that they're complicit in covering this information up. I've talked to these people on several different occasions here in Palm Beach County, whether it was law enforcement, wildlife law enforcement, or the biological sciences, biologists in the field, biologists here in the state of Florida in several different state parks, park directors. And there is something going on, and these people are very aware of it. And you know, I look at it in a very matter-of-fact way. Either way, whether they know about it and they're aiding in the management of the species, and they're not telling the general public, or they're simply not aware of it and unwilling to look at evidence that's being presented to them on a yearly basis, or that they may in fact see in the field. Either way, there's a defect of character. There's a flaw in character here, because you can't call yourself a scientist and not truly evaluate the evidence for all of this objectively, and there is physical evidence.
So what you're looking at is what I feel is the strongest collection of photographic evidence, which will hopefully lead us to that other word that we're all hoping for, which is proof.
This piece of footage was shot in 2018 while on an expedition in Central Florida. As you can see, there's a giant Sasquatch watching me as I film him. If you look closely, you can see the facial movement in between frames. And though the footage was only 7 seconds long, it's a significant piece of evidence. You're staring at a giant human primate. It's real.
The Bigfoot Researcher's Journal.
It's a sad fact that 8 billion people on planet Earth are going to disagree that what you're staring at right now is a living relic hominoid. This is what we call a Bigfoot. No, it's not HD crystal clear footage, and it's in the bushes and it's hard to see. But that's exactly why you think this isn't possible to begin with. CryptoReality.us has engaged in 3 years of serious, hardcore field research. And in that short amount of time, we've been studying several different groups of these individuals, like the one you're staring at on this film right now. And we have an unprecedented amount of visual data. The Sasquatch species is 100% real. And while the rest of the world is locked in a debate that goes nowhere, very simply put, we're getting the job done. The Sasquatch species exists. Thousands of people have seen it. And for those of us who have, we know exactly what we're staring at right here. CryptoReality.us. Get involved and let's get the truth to the world. Here's an interesting piece of information for you. In communist China, they have Sasquatch. They're called Yeren. And the communist government of China recognizes that they're a real species. In fact, you're looking at the entrance to the preserve that's been set aside to protect the Yeren and their families. I got a question for you. Where's American science on this issue? In the dark.